My name is Jerry Gill. Today is January 25, 2010. I'm visiting with Tonya Hoover on the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is for the O State Storage Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And Tonya, I want to first of all say thank you for taking time to visit with us this morning.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Appreciate it very much. So you're on the Oklahoma State University campus today to talk to some student groups and,
yes.
and understand maybe including the women in College of Engineering, Architecture, and Technology.
Yes, I am.
Great. When were you last on campus?
I was last on campus 6 months ago. I think I stopped in July. I come to Oklahoma over the past few years about twice a year, working with IFSTA and Fire Protection Publications on some work that they continue to do. And I sit on a couple of their committees, and so I've been in town, or actually been in Oklahoma City or Tulsa, and if I get a chance, I always like to come to Stillwater and visit.
And their international headquarters is here in Stillwater, is that right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay. Is it good to be back on campus?
It is, and every time I come back, there's something new and exciting. I remember when the first time I came back after a while with all the new buildings, the new engineering building, and then after the stadium was redone, and it was just amazing because it's just different than when I was here. It's grown so much. Stillwater's grown so much.
Do you have any other plans for you in Stillwater? Any friends or professors you're going to visit with?
Actually, yes. I was going to try to visit with one of my professors that's just down the hall. And the first thing I did last night after I checked into my room was I went to Eskimo Joe's and for my burger.
Did you get some cheese fries too?
Well, you know, I thought about the cheese fries and I thought I'm going to overdo it with the burger. I better just stick with fries. But there's always, Eskimo Joe's to pop into and the Hideaway to pop into. Visit the fire station, of course. Walk around campus. I'm looking forward to spending the day.
Tonya, you're currently acting fire marshal for the state of California with all the attendant responsibilities of that. And we want to discuss these, but first I'd like to visit a little bit about your early life. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, about your family, your parents?
Oh, I love talking about where I grew up. I grew up in a small south central Pennsylvania town called Shippensburg. Shippensburg, at that time, was about 15,000 people. Had a state college. Has a state college. It's known as a teaching college. Pretty quiet life. My father passed away when I was 13, so my younger brother and I and my mom stayed living in Shippensburg. When I was 14, I had the opportunity to become a junior member for the volunteer fire service. My father, my godfather, my family was very active in the volunteer fire service. So I joined as a volunteer firefighter. My hobby, you could say, through high school. Spent a lot of time at the fire station and developing a sense of community through the fire service, basically. Like any other, teenager, living in a small town. Graduated from high school and had an opportunity. I looked at a couple schools that offered fire protection engineering or fire protection engineering technology, and decided to come to Oklahoma State right out of high school. I had traveled with my parents, short trips, but never on my own. So right out of high school, my mom packed us up and we came to Stillwater, and 2 days later she was gone and I was here, and it's like, wow, now what do I do? But I came to Stillwater strictly after high school, strictly for the fire protection program. That's what brought me to Oklahoma State.
Just a national reputation.
It has a national reputation, still does to this day. And it was nice because I was here and there were so many of us from all over the country. We had kids from California, we had kids from the East Coast, the Midwest, the South. We had international students. And for me, growing up in a small town where probably the most international food I had was pizza. I'll tell you a funny story about the Chinese food. It was eye-opening. And at the same time, where I grew up in Oklahoma, there's some cultural differences there. And I learned how to two-step, and I learned I learned an appreciation for the Cotton Eye Joe, and
Learn to say howdy and y'all.
yes, and I picked up a little accent for 5 years.
Well, going back to a little bit, talking about some of your principles that you picked up, maybe working as a junior volunteer in the fire station, were there principles or values, Tonya, that you learned growing up that have been important to you in your life?
Well, earlier you'd asked me about my parents, and my parents have always been a role model. My father is a guiding light in my head constantly. He was, and both my parents, very dedicated to community. My father was very dedicated to public service. The fire service was his passion, his love, next to his family. And my mom used to tell a joke about if there was a choice, if there was something going on and they were supposed to go someplace, but there was a fire emergency or an emergency where they needed the chief, he would take the emergency, kiss her on the forehead, and say goodbye. But she understood that. Principles, it was about community, teamwork. The fire service is a family. I still consider the fire service a family. It was another family, an extension of my family, and that was something that's carried through to me. A passion. I come from a place in the fire service where the craft is a passion. It wasn't just a job. And as a volunteer, it wasn't your job. You chose to be there.
You were talking about some of your family, being engaged in fire safety and firefighting, but was your particular influence in getting in there through your father, do you think?
Yes, it was. My brother and I would spend Saturday afternoons, Sundays with my dad at the fire station. And you don't think about these things until later in your life, but I remember the first fire that I went with my dad. Now, you wouldn't be able to do this anymore, but my dad was babysitting my brother and I guess I was about 10 and he was 8, and it was a grass fire, and he went and parked the car someplace on a hill so he could look at do a situational update. And we're sitting in the car, and he says to my brother and I, hey, if it gets too close, I need you to honk the horn, turn on the siren, and I will come and get you and move the car. I'm just right down, over here. We're like, okay. So I'm watching the flames get closer and closer and closer, and I'm looking at my brother going, I think we should do something. He's like, oh no, it's not close enough. It's right up against us. Finally, my dad turns around. Just timing was everything. My dad turns around, my brother hits the siren, my dad moves the car. And what's funny about that is now I'm involved in that whole wildland urban interface or wildland firefighting. I understand it, and I think to myself, well, let me see, what were we doing wrong? First of all, we shouldn't have been there. Second of all, we weren't in the black zone. I'm going through all these situational awareness things in my head. But it was my first experience at being there with my dad. I used to watch my dad a lot. Within the volunteer fire service, the women's organizations and the junior member programs, the family organizations were support mechanisms for the volunteer fire service. And I remember a lot of activities that we did to support the fire service, going to fires to feed the firefighters food and water and things of that way. And it was just so much of family involvement. It was about the community.
So back to your OSU experience. Had you ever been on the campus before your mother drove you to Stillwater?
No.
What were your first impressions of Stillwater in Oklahoma State?
Wow, it's flat. I remember coming on campus and looking around, and I thought, there's no mountains. Where's the green? Because it was August, and the waving wheat, and it was different. It was different. One of the things that sticks out in my head is dirt, red dirt. I looked at the dirt and I thought, it's red. It was quite an experience. It was quite an experience.
So there was never any doubt about your major. You knew what you were going to get to.
Never a doubt about my major. it became evident to me about 2 years in that I was not going to be an engineer. I was on the 5-year plan. And so I had to do some modifications to my major. Took me a little, what I would consider a little longer than most. But I knew my passion was with the fire protection, was with the fire technology aspect of the program. How I wove that into the rest of my skill set, I needed to make some adjustments. But the folks here, my professors, the dean at the time, my counselor, they were very supportive because I had some struggles. I had some maturing to do. I needed to grow up. I was 18 years old, and I'm a firm believer that sometimes you're not ready to go to college until after you graduate. And I needed to grow up, and they were very supportive during that growing up phase.
So now, what year did you enroll at Oklahoma State?
I enrolled in 1980.
Fall of 1980?
Fall of 1980, and I was here until 1985.
Okay.
I needed to take, and it's something I'll talk about, is I needed to take a semester off. Again, I was part of that maturing phase. I was not doing well academically, and I needed to make some really tough decisions.
Was that after your first semester?
That would have been my third semester. Yeah, third semester. My professor, who ended up being a very good friend, had some great professors in the school. He basically looked at me and said, "You got to make some tough choices." And I was the kid, my friends laugh, they tell me I'm stubborn, I just say I'm tenacious. I came from the place that you just hung in there. You just kept doing it, and you didn't drop a class, you just kept going. Well, sometimes you need to drop the class before it gets too late and reboot. So I had to make some tough choices.
These are some engineering classes.
Yes.
You're taking specifically.
Yes, engineering classes. I knew I was not going to be an engineer. When you take chemistry twice, and you take physics once, and you know you have to pass it, and that's what you do, is you pass it. There was no way I was going to make it through calculus. I was great in calculus for about the first, 4 weeks. And then after that, it was all downhill. Found out I needed to drop calculus. And that was part of my soul searching, is math was not my strong point. My strong point lies in other places. I had I kind of tease now that the kids within the School of Fire Protection have it relatively easy when it comes to professors. There was a particular professor that we had as freshmen, and I swear to this day his role was to weed us out. You were either in or you were out, and if you could make it through him the first year, you were good to go for the next 3. And he was very supportive. I spent time talking with him about different things, and I guess it was the tenacity. But when he figured that I was struggling in my math classes, my math courses, I had made a switch to the College of Education, technical education, and he said to me, I don't want you taking easy classes. Why don't you take another math class? You take another math class, and I'll support you as you take that math class. And he was very helpful in pointing me in different directions, helping me get help with my math class. And he said, you need to work on that. And now, since the pressure's off a little bit, why don't you go work on that?
Tonya, you mentioned earlier that probably math wasn't one of your strengths. You said you had other strengths. What were those other strengths you're referring to?
Well, I think my strengths come from team building, listening. I've been told that I do more listening and asking questions than I do talking. I research. I love to dive into research, find out why is something the way it is, which goes back to the questions. Why? Why do we do it that way? Writing. I love to write about things. My skills don't come from the mathematical computation of things. My skills come from, I think, an intuition, which people may laugh. Well, is that a female intuition? I work a lot off of feelings. Something doesn't feel right.
Relational skills.
Relational skills, yes, yes.
Well, Tonya, you talked about some people that were helpful to you. Could you mention some of the, did you feel comfortable sharing names of the professors?
Absolutely.
Others?
When I was here at school, 2 professors that stick out, well actually 3, that were very helpful. One's no longer with us, Professor John Harvey, who taught Essentials in Electronics, and he was a gentleman's gentleman. Very supportive of the students, very engaging with the students. He gave me an opportunity to work with him, for him as a student aide. Was very supportive when he knew that I was struggling through things. The other 2, one is still here on campus, Professor Pat Brock, still teaching for the School of Fire Protection. In fact, I think Pat is probably going to retire soon, which will be a loss to the school, but I wish him a lot of luck. He was very supportive. And Pat was one of the people that he knew I was struggling, but he hung in there with me. The other one who's no longer here is Professor Larry Borgelt. And Professor Borgelt I classify as the professor that was the person that was weeding you out. I mean, Larry was tough, and you needed to be on your game, and he kept you on your game. And I used to laugh as students, and I don't, this is a great story to share, but he was one of the few people that I knew that when we had a 4-hour lab, he could talk for 4 hours. And we'd have him for class in the morning, and then we'd have him for lab in the afternoon, and that was part of that weeding out process, I think. But those 3 individuals stick out in my mind as being the 3 that really kept me focused and kept me here.
Kathy, looking back, just in class, out of class, just your total undergraduate experience, are there some special memories that you have and some special OSU experiences that come to mind?
It's the people. I can't say that there's one special experience, because most of it was centered around the School of Fire Protection and the people in the program, folks that I met in the program. The time, the study times we spent at the campus fire station. In fact, I was just at a working conference this weekend, and I'm there with alumni, OSU alumni, folks that I went to school with. And we were sharing stories about the campus fire station and just laughing about that whole setup, what it was like to be at the campus fire station. What the folks that lived there, interacting with the guys that lived there, studying, struggling through classes, long nights learning. I can remember when we learned how to use a computer. Oh my gosh. My daughter now laughs at that. She thinks that's really funny. And swearing. I had a program we were supposed to write for sprinklers, and I goofed it up so bad, and I lost the program in the computer, and here I am, we're down to the deadline date of trying to get this in, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm so confused. But there's a group of guys that I'm studying with. There's like 4 other guys I'm studying with, and they're like, Tonya, we'll help you. And we all pitched in and worked on getting my project done. And I thought, you guys have projects too. Oh, we'll get it done. And they were so helpful. It was so much about making sure that we all got through it together. Those type of experiences.
Yeah.
Football games.
There you go. You mentioned working with the guys. What was probably sort of the ratio of women to men in the fire protection safety program?
Oh my gosh. When I went through, there were, that I remember, 4 of us and maybe 40 guys in the program.
What was that like?
Interesting. And you couldn't miss class. Well, if you missed class, let's just say people noticed. And I remember sitting in an EET class, lecture class, in this big lecture room, and the fire protection students, we always hung out together. Our schedules were always typically together. As freshmen, you came in and you moved through the program together, and you started off in your program right away. There was none of this, the first semester was general, and your second semester, and then you got into your major, maybe your second year. You were a fire protection student from the day you walked on campus. So we were all in classes together. So in this EET class, the fire protection students I don't know why I would do this with them, but they'd all sit in the back. We all sat along the wall in the back in a group. And the guys knew what they were doing. They were pretty sharp. Most of them were pretty sharp. And they'd yuck it up back there, and you know how guys do. And I'd be back there and trying to do my thing. And the professor in this class of like, I don't know, 250 students, he says from the front of the room, way down in the front, he says, at the time my main name's Snyder, he says, "Ms. Snyder, do you have any questions? Do you understand this?" And I'm looking around. I'm fine. And I'm looking at the guys going, "Shut up! He's picking on me! It's you guys!" It was so funny. Because we all just hung around together. But it was not easy to go unnoticed. It had its challenges at times.
What other ways was it different for you being a female and being in fire protection safety?
Well, being a female in the fire service during that time period was different. I had some tough learning lessons as a teenager in the fire service, a female teenager in the fire service. And so when I came to Oklahoma State understanding, you know, you're a girl among all these guys, I can't say once that any of them were disrespectful. They weren't. I didn't have the experiences that I've heard about from maybe other folks. They were very respectful. I didn't live in the fire station. I didn't want to live in the fire station. I lived on campus. And, you know, they'd pick and they'd say funnies. I never took it seriously. It's like, just one of the guys, whatever.
You said you stayed elsewhere. I understand there's a story about where you stayed.
I actually lived in this building. It was a dorm.
Where we're interviewing today.
My freshman dorm was in the building that we're interviewing today, and it was on the other side of the building we're in today. At the end, in a corner room, which was a 3-person room. So I came here and had 2 roommates, and actually lived in Cornell for my first year.
Cornell Hall for the first 2 years.
Yep, I lived on the first floor for the first semester, and then transferred to the 4th floor, which was more of the upper division students. Part of maturing was understanding that I needed to be away from noise and a lot of crowds to focus. My daughter kind of laughs at me now. She says I suffer from attention deficit. It's kind of like, oh look, bling. I can be distracted at looking at other things. But during that time period, I knew I needed to be someplace a little quieter. So I moved to the 4th floor where it was a little quieter. But it was in this building.
Did you have some favorite hangouts on campus and off campus?
Well, there was favorite hangouts. Most of us, you know, we all hung out at the fire stations, fire protection students, but there was Eskimo Joe's, of course, the Fox at the time.
Hideaway was right across the street from you.
Yep, Hideaway was right across the street. Everybody went for fried mushrooms. We, you know, people spent time on the strip, bopping around. There was, you know, the dance club outside of town, which actually it was kind of funny because the dance club outside of town was owned by somebody else that ended up being owned by a fire protection student after he graduated. And then he ended up having 2 places, the one out of town and then there was a place in town that he owned. There's so many, you know, we hung out at the lake, you know, when the weather was nice. So many different things.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience? You worked as a student, as did other students in your major at the fire station. Could you tell us a little bit what that was like and what your experience was?
Well, I worked actually for the university safety department. I became I guess you could call it a student inspector, so I became an inspector fairly early. And while we had live-in student with what we call part-paid firefighters, they lived on campus in the fire station. They helped cover and assist the Stillwater Fire Department. So they either lived at the station or lived at one of the other stations pulling a shift duty when they weren't in class. I chose to work because I didn't live in the fire station. I worked for the university in the safety department where I was an inspector. So I did the inspections, the fire life safety inspections for the campus buildings, which is kind of interesting because I so many years later, went back to the university system and actually did work for another university later on in my career.
What does that entail, being an inspector?
Being an inspector, my job was to go around the building using the codes that were enforceable on campus at the time, making sure that the buildings were fire safe, that the fire protection systems were operating, that storage corridors were clear, that exit doors worked, that exit lights were lit, hazardous materials were stored correctly, basically doing the oversight of code requirements on the campus and the campus buildings. What that did, though, is it got me into every building on campus, practically every space. I was in areas of campus buildings I bet you half the people don't even know exist. But it was because it was part of the inspection process. So any door that I couldn't, and I had this massive ring of keys to get into every building, every door. It was huge. If I couldn't get into a door with one of my keys, it made me a little suspicious, and I'd go looking for the manager. What's behind that door? I also responded to emergencies on campus as part of safety. We were responsible, when the fire department responded on campus, we were responsible to respond also to do things like reset the fire alarm, help them get into certain areas that maybe they couldn't get in with their keys. So we had that liaison with the Stillwater Fire Department as well.
What were some of the most interesting things you found behind those closed doors that you could tell about?
Stuff. Going through, well, the student union always had stuff.
Mm.
Storage from the old post office, the old brass mailboxes with the brass mailbox faces, paperwork, old furniture, and I think, why don't we just get rid of this? Why are we storing it? Just all sorts of stuff. You name it, it was there. Funny.
During your undergraduate degree, did you have a specialty area or field that interested you more, within your broader field?
I would say I developed an interest in codes and standards. Here at Oklahoma State, we spent a lot of time in the National Fire Protection Association Codes and Standards, and one of those was what's called the Life Safety Code, and I think that's where I developed this interest in regulations, code work, code enforcement. That seemed to be the place that I focused a lot of my energies.
Did you also have some experience maybe working in pipeline supervision? Was an intern one summer? Did I see that in your resume?
One summer, I actually worked for Amoco Oil in the oil fields. I was a roustabout in Watauga, Oklahoma, which was interesting. I didn't know anything about Watauga, Oklahoma. They had a Pizza Hut. That was an interesting experience. But yeah, it was a chance to get involved in the petroleum side of our profession. And at that time, fire protection had, the petroleum industry had a lot of interest in fire protection, as they still do. And so we had a lot of the petroleum industry interviewing for summer students to either work out in the fields or work at their production plants. In fact, my ex-husband worked for Mobil Oil for 2 summers. He spent a summer as a summer intern in California at one of their production facilities, and then he also spent a summer in Kansas at a production facility in Kansas. So Oklahoma State students spent a lot of time with either power plants, the oil industry. We had kids that went to Alaska and worked their summer in Alaska with, I think it was ARCO at the time. So it was a great opportunity to get some real world experience before you even got out.
You mentioned your ex-husband. Did you get married right after college? Or
got married right after college. I met him here. I actually met him in line. He was registering. He had just gotten here. He was registering, and he had this Hershey fire department Pennsylvania t-shirt on, and I was like, somebody from Pennsylvania, oh my gosh. So I went over and introduced myself, and it was kind of funny because he kind of looked at me like, yeah, whatever. And it was actually enrolling in the School of Fire Protection. And the school has a program, it's like rookies, you're an incoming fire protection student, and they have an association, the Fire Protection Association or Society. And the more senior members of the program take on a incoming student, and it's almost like a fraternal organization. It's like a fraternal organization. You find out about the program, you meet upperclassmen, you find out about campus. Well, it ended up, he just happened to be what they call my rat, which means he was the lower classman that I was responsible for. So that's how I got to know him.
Interesting story.
Yeah, met him here.
Do you stay in touch with your fellow graduates here at Oklahoma State?
All the time. In fact, the one thing I would say that the School of Fire Protection has that many programs don't, or other schools don't have, that I haven't seen this with other universities, is the connection with each other. As I said, I earlier this weekend, with this interview, I was in Oklahoma City doing some work with IFSTA and Fire Protection Publications. I sit in a room with folks that I went to school with, or folks that graduated way before I did, and we still stay in contact. We ask each other questions, we email each other, we call each other on the phone to find out what's going on. Have you ever ran into this problem? Have you ever seen this problem? Very connected group of folks, because it is such a specialty.
How has your academic preparation and training you received at OSU help you prepare for your career? Was it influential in your career?
Very much so. And again, you don't think about these things until way after. But I always tell folks, I started my code enforcement part of my profession here at Oklahoma State. I was a student inspector. Later on in my life, I became a deputy fire marshal at UC Berkeley, where I managed an inspection program and had responsibility for inspecting buildings and meeting with professors and doing training classes. All of my Oklahoma experience helped me fit nicely into the academia world. I'd already been there. I understood that. Oklahoma State, the School of Fire Protection, spent a lot of time with petroleum production, and we talked a lot about power plants and fuels. Well, now as the assistant, when I came into the job, to my current job, I came in as the assistant State Fire Marshal, and now as the State Fire Marshal. But the State Fire Marshal's office has responsibility for hazardous materials pipeline in the state of California. I never thought that I would draw upon my Oklahoma State experience in hazardous materials pipeline and the petroleum industry to understand what I'm doing now for my pipeline safety division. And a lot of the folks that I meet on my pipeline safety division side of the house, some of those guys, in fact, a couple of them I met last year at a conference, were Oklahoma State grads. It's like, oh, you went to Oklahoma State? Yeah, I went to Oklahoma State. I regulate you. It's interesting. It's really interesting. It's so much of what I did here at the school, or what I learned here at Oklahoma State, I've been able to use through my entire career. Connections that I've made, people that I never thought I'd see again pop up someplace else, in some other area of the country.
Well, following up on that a little bit, can you share a little bit your past firefighting experience and positions, and how it's help you to where you are in your career now?
Well, starting out as a junior member firefighter, I didn't spend a whole lot of time what I call fighting fire, because as a junior member, you're not allowed to really fight fire. But I engaged in the training activities and went on emergency calls and became an EMT fairly early in my fire service. I don't want to call it a career, but maybe my passion. I understand, I have a comprehension, I've pulled hose, I haven't done those activities extensively like a firefighter would do, but I have an understanding and appreciation for what it is. And then things that I did here at Oklahoma State, such as being an inspector and public speaking and training folks on how to use fire extinguishers, that and training them on fire safety, that translated into the next phase of my life, where I took on working for a sprinkler company, doing inspections of sprinkler systems, and I could pull upon my education on sprinkler systems. And then the next phase was working for a fire department as a plans checker, and doing the engineering component of a fire department, and that pulls upon your technical ability, your education in fire protection systems that I got here at Oklahoma State. And then the next phase was going to a university and basically managing a fire life safety program and pulling upon everything from my interaction with the fire department, because I was the campus's fire department liaison, to academic things I learned about academia and how academia needed to work in a regulated environment. Everything just kind of started weaving together, and then moving on, I had an opportunity to become a fire marshal for a local jurisdiction, for a fire department. Again, pulling upon my fire service experience, my educational background, my networking in that position, working with architects, engineers, designers, until today, where it's almost like everything comes together. I have to pull in everything that I've learned or I've been exposed to on a daily basis, because it's not just about fire protection. It's about fire protection. It's about relationship building. It's about negotiations. It's about understanding the different world and the political environment that people are in. It's more of a big picture outlook on things. And I think that if I look back from the time I started at 14 to where I am today, I've had to pull upon all of that to get to where I am today. I never in my time have ever taken one experience for granted, because every experience, whether it was a success or a challenge, I don't like to say failure because I don't think any of them were failures, taught me something that I can use today.
Out of all these different experiences, Tonya, what part of fire safety excites you the most? Did you really enjoy the most?
And that's a hard one. I think it's because I see something. I think fire safety speaks to everyone. I think everyone deserves it. I think everyone's entitled to safety. It's an opportunity. It's kind of twofold. It's an opportunity to reinforce components that people take for granted, that they don't think about on their day-to-day life. It's about giving folks information to prevent accidents, to prevent incidents. I mean, when we talk about things like fire deaths, fire damage, fire losses, those are all preventable. And I think we as a society take for granted, well, it was just a fire. That fire cost X amount of dollars. It had an impact on a community, it had an impact on a family, it had an impact on firefighters, and there's the potential for loss, not just in property, but loss of life to people that were involved in that business or that home, but also the emergency responders that respond. So I look at it as an opportunity to reduce loss and start thinking about putting our money in the prevention aspect, to support the efforts of our firefighters and of our communities. I mean, we don't have a lot of spare cash to be thrown around for losses.
Have there been some highlights in your career that events that stand out in your mind more than others that you can share with us?
There's a few. My first NFPA conference stands out, and it was in Kansas City, and it was the year after the walkway fell at the hotel. We were staying at the hotel where the walkway fell in Kansas City. and talking with folks at the conference, being part of the conference, because the NFPA conference was the place where all the, what I'll call the heavy hitters go, the big names in fire protection.
Can you?
The National Fire Protection Association,
Okay,
has a conference annually, and my first one was a chance to go and sit and listen to what I'll call the big boys, and to meet alumni that were involved in bigger things than I was at the time, and to draw upon their experiences. That stands out. Through my career, I've met a lot of folks, some of the bigger names in the fire service, but meeting folks like John Hoagland, who is an icon in the School of Fire Protection and fire safety, the folks that I have an opportunity to work with IFSTA now and FPP, Fire Protection Publications. That's a highlight of my career. I was recognized by my peers a few years back and received an award. That was a highlight of my career. I mean, when your peers give you an award for efforts.
What kind of award was that?
It's called the Charlie Gray Award, and it's named after a fire marshal out of Santa Rosa. And he had a passion for fire prevention as well, and did a lot to promote that in Northern California. So the Northern California Fire Prevention Officers, which is a section of Cal Chiefs, the California Fire Chiefs, gives an award annually to an outstanding member that has continued to promote fire safety, fire prevention, and it's done by you're nominated by your peers. It's all a surprise, and I was nominated and was awarded that award, and it was a big moment. Being in my current position, I never thought in a million years that I'd be doing what I'm doing now. It never crossed my mind. 10 years ago, if somebody would have said to me, "You're going to be the next State Fire Marshal," I'd have laughed at them. No way. I'm going to be a fire marshal in a local jurisdiction. No way.
Picking up on that, how have these, you've described this to a certain extent, but how have these career assignments and experiences prepared you for your current position, first as assistant State Fire Marshal and now as Fire Marshal for the state of California? I mean, there's some pretty big responsibilities you have now. How have these prepared you for that?
Well, the things that I've been involved with, the things that I've done through my career, have given me an opportunity to listen to a lot of different outlooks. It gave me an opportunity to speak to a lot of different folks from different demographics. So when you have the opportunity to do that, and then you move into an environment that deals constantly with the broad brush, the big picture, multi-disciplines, multi-demographics, you get a feel for balance. Because in my position as a State Fire Marshal, it's about balance, because I can't just look at one community. I can't just focus on LA City or San Francisco or Humboldt County. I have to look at the benefit for the state as a whole from the standpoint of fire safety, fire protection, as well as its economic impact on the state. So I would say that everything I've done up to this point, that balance, being able to draw upon different views and being associated with different groups of folks that have different views, helps me where I am now. Because you can be focused in your mission, but you can't be always focused in how you get there. There's as they like to say, there's many ways to skin a cat. And I sometimes have to use all of them.
When you said earlier, did you ever envision that this little girl from Kittensburg, PA, is going to be Fire Marshal of the state of California?
Never. Never. I mean, my big thing was, I'm going to be a Fire Marshal someday. was happy being a fire marshal and in the jurisdiction I was at and doing my thing and supporting the state's effort and promoting fire safety and traveling around and doing that with folks that I knew. I never thought, ever, when I was here, I never thought, it never crossed my mind. Because I looked at the Oklahoma State Fire Marshal or the fire marshal in these different areas when I would go to meetings as being, just beyond my reach. I remember the first time I was invited to sit in a committee in California with the Fire Marshal of California at the time. And I was speechless. Well, for about the first 2 minutes. But here I am at this table. I was an inspector. I was part of a statewide organization. But here I was sitting with the state fire marshal for the state of California, at the time the 5th largest economy in the world. And I'm sitting at the table with these big names in fire science and in fire prevention, not only in California, but throughout the country. Folks like Ronnie Coleman. In fact, Ronnie Coleman was the fire marshal at the time. Ronnie Coleman is known throughout the fire prevention world and throughout the United States. And I was sitting at the table with him, and he was asking me what I thought. It was just, wow.
Tonya, what, so far as fetched in your mind, what are some things that led up to your appointment, first as assistant state fire marshal and then now as fire marshal?
Well, at the time, 2.5 years ago, I was the fire marshal for a medium-sized jurisdiction in the San Francisco Bay Area, a place called Moraga Fire District. And I was very much involved in the wildland-urban interface fire problem. And through an organization that I was active with, I was asked to co-chair a committee. And I co-chaired a committee with a woman by the name of Kate Dargan. And she was the Napa County Fire Marshal at the time. So her and I developed a very close friendship and a camaraderie and a passion for the subject area. Well, she was so much further ahead than I was in the subject matter. I mean, she was a 25-year CAL FIRE CDF person, knew the wildland urban interface inside and out. So she was bringing me along for the training and education. Actually.
She was a mentor for you.
She was a mentor for me. And her and I worked very closely on a number of things. In fact, we were working on a risk assessment, and an Oklahoma State grad had just released a big risk assessment that was being recognized throughout the country. And I told Kate, I said, I know him, I went to school with him. We need to make a trip to Colorado Springs.
Who is that?
Brett Lacey. So she's like, well, okay, we'll go to Colorado Springs and see what they got. So we went to Colorado Springs, met with the Colorado Springs Fire Department. Their fire chief had come from Oakland Fire, so there was this California connection. Brett and I had gone to school together. There was the OSU connection. And Kate and I just worked through this wildland urban interface thing together. When her and I started working together, about 2 years after her and I started working together as local fire marshals, a good friend was appointed fire marshal for the state, Ruben Grajava. And Ruben had come to talk to the FPOs, and he had seen Kate and talked to Kate, and had asked Kate a few months later if she would be his assistant state fire marshal. She took that job, and she became his assistant state fire marshal. Well, shortly, it was like 8 months, not even a year, of her being the assistant state fire marshal. Ruben went off to be the director of CAL FIRE. Everybody kind of gets bumped up. Kate now becomes the state fire marshal and the assistant state fire marshal at the same time. She had to hold 2 positions. And she said to me, I'd like you to be my assistant state fire marshal if you're interested. I'd like you to put in, the governor's application and go through the process. And at the time I said, I was going through some things at home and dealing with, some, trying to take care of some business in my personal life. And I said, I don't think so. I can do so much more from you at a local level, and I can do so much more with you from a local level than being in the system. I mean, I can promote the things that you want with local fire service being on the outside. We had this discussion for almost 8 months, until one day, 8 months later, she calls me on the phone on a Monday morning. We had these regular phone call conversations on Monday in the morning. It was like our girl time. She'd be going to work, and I'd be sitting at my desk, and she'd say, I'm going to ask you one last time. She goes, I have to go meet with the director, and I need to give him an answer because I have your name and 2 other names that I would put forward. She goes, but you would be my choice. She says, I need to know, for sure. And I said to her, you know, it's funny you should say that. I had the weirdest dream last night. And seriously, I had a dream about being the Assistant State Fire Marshal and how cool that would be to be able to help her move her things forward, to have an opportunity to work for her, because she was a mentor, she is a mentor. To learn from her every day, to watch her every day, and how cool would that be for that opportunity? And I think I could do a really good job. And she said to me, what are you telling me? I said, well, let's talk. She was like, well, we can talk today. Tomorrow. I said, no, I can't talk this. I'm in meetings all week. And she was in meetings. And so finally we were able to get together on a Friday. And I told her, yep, okay, I'll come to work for you. And I went to work to be the Assistant State Fire Marshal. Held that position for 2 years. The plan was that her and I would go down the road together side by side until the governor's term was over, and you know, depending on what happened, whether she would be reappointed or she would retire, that I would go out the same time she did, and the new administration would bring in their new people. Well, she retired early. Actually, she retired. Her mother was very sick, and she went to spend time with her family. And timing was good. She felt comfortable retiring, and she retired, which gave me the opportunity for my boss, the director, to appoint me as the State Fire Marshal, which is why I'm in what we call an acting role until the governor. It's up to the governor to make the final appointment.
So you had your boss is the director
of CAL FIRE.
CAL FIRE.
Right. He's the director of CAL FIRE. The system works. There's the governor. There's the Secretary of Natural Resources. My boss, the director of CAL FIRE, reports to the Secretary of Natural Resources, and I report to the director of CAL FIRE. The State Fire Marshal's position is interesting, as in I typically walk in 2 worlds or walk a fence. I have responsibility to my fire department, which is CAL FIRE. I work for CAL FIRE. But I also have statutory and regulatory responsibility to the local fire service, the 900 fire departments that are in California. So, whereas I may report to the director, I also report to all those other fire chiefs as their fire marshal and become their voice at a local level on fire prevention, fire engineering issues.
Can you talk a little bit more about, or perhaps outline some of your major administrative and management responsibilities as State Fire Marshal?
The State Fire Marshal is responsible for statewide policy on fire and life safety, what we call fire and panic safety, within the state of California. With that comes the responsibility of staying connected with the issues of fire prevention and fire safety, state fire training in California. I oversee the staff is about 175 people, and we have divisions in fire and life safety, which is our code enforcement division. I have a law enforcement investigation division, fire engineering division, which is all the fire protection systems, licensing, smoke alarms, installation criteria.
Sprinkler systems, etc.
Right, sprinkler systems, special type of extinguishing systems. I have a code and regulations division. The State Fire Marshal's office is unique in that we oversee all code and regulation as it pertains to fire and life safety, and that includes in other agencies that are adopting or trying to move forward provisions that deal with fire and life safety. Their adoption packages have to actually come to the State Fire Marshal's office for approval before they go to what we call our Building Standards Commission, who oversees our code adoption process. So I've got the Division of Code and Regulations. And then I'm also responsible for statewide fire training. So state fire training falls within the Office of the State Fire Marshal. We're responsible for overseeing a statewide training program for the fire service. It is a volunteer program. Volunteer as in voluntary program, as in there's no training mandate for fire service. But we provide the base education for the fire service. So we offer promotional, or not promotional tracks, but we offer specialty tracks, fire marshal track, fire engineering, or fire company officer, chief officer tracks, mechanics. There are classes within that the State Fire Marshal's office oversees and updates and delivers. It's part of a delivery system. So and I've got my pipeline safety. I'm responsible for over 5,500 miles of pipeline transporting hazardous materials throughout the state of California. So we work with big and small operators.
Yeah, that includes energy companies,
Morgan,
shipping
Kinder
ports,
Morgan,
etc.
When the pipeline comes off the port, and then it's piped throughout the state, we take it from the port. So we work with a lot of providers, or a lot of operators. So it's a very diversified office, and we also have responsibility for almost 1 billion square foot of state properties for inspection and code enforcement. We are very active in what I call the green building movement, providing educational providing information to the fire service on green building and alternate energies, whether that be the biofuels or photovoltaic, hydrogen, anything that we look at our offices, anything that would affect the fire service, whether it be training, fire protection systems, or fire and life safety, we kind of collect it and help distribute the information. Now, the State Fire Marshal's office, like I said, is only 175 people for the entire state of California, which is about the size of the eastern coast. We do that because we have a tremendous amount of partnerships and stakeholders that work with us, such as local fire service. I could not do what I do without the involvement of my local fire service peers.
Or you coordinate all the activities, all the
Coordinate
local
all the
fire
activities,
marshals.
right.
They still have their staffs.
They still have their jurisdictions. It's like I always tell folks, the state has the tablets, the 2 tablets that come down, and we bring them down to local government, and local government then has the ability to make those tablets more restrictive if they need to. But we have a very strong partnership with our local fire service. They are extremely helpful in our code development process and our oversight programs and our advisory committees. It's incredible. For us to be able to do it ourselves is an incredible workload. We wouldn't be able to. So we partner with our locals because we're all in it together.
What size budget do you manage yourself that you're responsible for?
Well, and what's interesting with the State Fire Marshal's budget is there's the general funds and then there's the special funds. My special fund budget is $20 million. Well, it's kind of hard to tell now. Take that. My total budget, if I use general and special funds, is about $21 million, and out of that, $10 million of it is general, 11 is special. We're moving a lot of our general funding over into special funds because the State Fire Marshal's office statutorily is supposed to be self-sufficient. And to do that, we have to move some of our overhead into our special funds and spread that in the special funds. The State Fire Marshal's office is supposed to be special feed. In other words, we're not supposed to draw from the general fund. And there's a challenge with that, is that if you're a small department, you have to spread your overhead and your revenue capability out over a smaller volume of folks, which then drives your hourly rate or your hourly cost up. And in an environment where you don't want to drive your cost up, you want to drive your costs down, there is a balance of people and responsibilities and the ability to collect fee for those responsibilities. Well, one of the things I had, and I consider this an advantage, was my ex-husband is a fire protection engineer, owns a consulting firm, very successful consulting firm. And so I was party to discussions about setting up a consulting business and understanding how that works and how overhead works and cost, being able to recover cost and that balance of spreading, things out so that, you have to have the money to get the people, you got to have the people to get the money, and that whole balancing. One of my first tasks when I came to the State Fire Marshal's office as the Assistant State Fire Marshal is to work through this so that we could start lowering our cost or balancing our costs. And it was the consultant side of my brain, having listened to that and watched that happen, that I was able to get my arms around the situation within my own office on our fee structure or on our ability to collect fees and understand why our rates were the way they were and what was missing that allowed us not to be totally cost recoverable. So that's another one of those pieces that you pull in from life experience that you can use in your day-to-day operations. But we are working in the State Fire Marshal's office to be more self-sufficient and to be less reliant upon the general fund. And in actuality, I think if you look at California right now with all state agencies and different departments, the same thing is starting to happen, is how do we stay away from relying on general funds to support our efforts.
Are the budget shortfalls impacting your
Yes. It is impacting everybody. California is the fifth largest economy. Well, it was the fifth largest economy in the world. Our state budget is equivalent to countries' budgets. Most states don't have the budget we have. Most states don't have the budget deficit we have. Right now we're looking at, I think it's about $20 billion.
Well, in dollars, how's it affected your budget? You said you have roughly around a $21 million budget.
Right. We've had to do things like positions that we were planning on hiring to fill for people that retired, not filling those positions. So you have a sense of salary savings there. We've been asked to take a 5% cut in our staffing as well as our costs. We typically go through a drill anyway annually, 5, 10, and 15% reductions. Now it's more than a drill. We're actually going through the 5% cut, which 5%. Okay. The State Fire Marshal's office has always pretty much been I like to say a mean and lean operation. I mean, especially within the last 15 years. It really hasn't had the luxury of a big budget. So we're doing things like not hiring into positions that are vacant, which impacts our ability to do work for our customers, i.e. local government. People have had to double up on some of their workload. We delay purchasing of some equipment. We've made do with some things that we do have. The nice thing, if there's a nice thing, but the nice thing is that the Office of the State Fire Marshal falls within the organizational structure of CAL FIRE. And the director of CAL FIRE looks at CAL FIRE as a total force concept. So not one department, not one group, not one division will take the hit for the department. We all work together at taking that hit. And within CAL FIRE, there's our fire protection branch, which is like our operational branch. Our resources branch, which is our foresters. We're responsible for
state parks and et cetera.
For all the state responsibility land, which is millions of acres. And then there's our fire prevention branch, which is the Office of the State Fire Marshal. And when the director talks about total force, he talks about whatever's going to happen to one group is going to happen to all of us, i.e. the concept of furloughs. CAL FIRE was blessed by the governor's office. The director went to the governor's office, and we were exempted from furloughs during the height of what we don't call it fire season anymore, our burn time, our heavy burn time. So within that exemption from furloughs was all of CAL FIRE. It didn't matter if you were a firefighter on the line or you were someone that was working through timesheets, whether it was the accounts payable folks, whether it was the office of the State Fire Marshal. The director said, we all need to be exempted because we all work together. We're all integrated together. One unit, one division does not stand alone. So through the budget process, we've all had to look holistically at where those cuts are going to come from.
Do you currently hold both positions as an assistant fire marshal
and the State Fire Marshal?
State Fire Marshal.
Because I'm acting, I'm still the Assistant State Fire Marshal. That is my appointed position. I'm still appointed by the governor as the Assistant State Fire Marshal, and I'm filling the role acting as the State Fire Marshal. But with that comes all the dual duties and responsibilities associated with that position. So though the governor he makes the final decision, has not made that final decision yet, I still have the responsibilities attached to being the State Fire Marshal.
On a permanent basis, you're referring to?
Right, on a permanent basis.
Do you see that being made in the near future?
I hope so. I really enjoy my job, and I really enjoy working with and for CAL FIRE and for the director of CAL FIRE. He has my support. I believe I have his support. But again, it's up to the governor of the state. He makes the decision, and he's kind of busy right now. Was your appointment by the governor Schwarzenegger? Was that Yes.
a special moment for you?
Well, I actually, he wasn't at my appointment, but he did sign my appointment papers. So in my office is my appointment certificate, all framed and matted with the seal and the governor's signature on it. Yeah, that's kind of cool. My boss was an actor. and it's kind of interesting because we laugh. Governor Schwarzenegger was involved in the film industry, and so my peers from out of state will say, "So, you're an actor too." It's kind of a joke.
And I'm sure the expression "make my day" you'll probably come.
Yeah, we try to stay away from that. I get asked quite a bit, have I ever met the governor? And I have, and I kind of joke around. I've said 12 words to the governor: "Good morning, governor. Good afternoon, governor. Thank you, governor. Good night, governor." And usually it's because we're in some sort of receiving line or it's some sort of event, and I've had the opportunity to represent the department, and so that's always an honor to represent the department.
Back on some of your early comments about your area, Tonya, as fire marshal for the state, what are the ongoing and emerging issues for fire safety in California that you see?
Well, emerging, and I wouldn't even call them emerging issues because they are just issues. Again, the wildland urban interface fire problem in the state of California. We're still getting our arms around that. I believe we know what to do. I believe we know how we can make the biggest impact. The biggest impact on that is our fire prevention measures, our risk mitigation measures. I think we are making headway there, but there's still much work to be done. Our fire loss situation, I think we will start to get more of a handle on with our residential sprinkler movement. The state of California is the third state now to adopt a statewide residential sprinkler mandate that all homes, 1 and 2 family and townhomes built in California after January 1st of 2011 will be sprinklered. And that has the hugest impact on fire, life safety, panic safety in the state of California, not only for residents and our visitors, but also our fire service. It will have the biggest impact in fire safety. Budget challenges and how we look at the fire service. When we talk about emerging issues, I don't think we can look at the fire service as we've traditionally looked at the fire service. We still have old stock of construction that have fire issues associated with it. But as we move away from that old stock into newer construction, along with that comes newer hazards, different philosophies in firefighting. And challenges associated with that if you start looking at what's going on economically right now. Communities are having to look at reductions in their public safety force that haven't happened in generations. I can't recall, I don't know too many other people that could recall the time when a community looked at laying off 147 firefighters. That's almost unheard of, but every community around the country is looking at their public safety staffing levels because they've looked at everybody else. They've had to go through so many cuts everywhere else, and they've tried to keep their public safety whole, but they're finding it's difficult to do that. So when we start impacting our, what I'll call the boots on the ground, our public safety force, our firefighters, our emergency medical folks, police services, we're going to take a hit there when those people aren't available to respond, when our response times are increased, when our get-out times are increased, when we've had to brown out stations, when we don't have the workforce to handle the emerging fire situation, the fire problem. So how do we mitigate that? Well, now we got to go back to that prevention. I firmly believe that we need to make sure that it doesn't get to the point where I need a large volume of people to fight a fire. So that balance of fire prevention and when do we call in the fire suppression. I used to tell my guys when I was a local fire marshal, every time their wheels rolled out the door on a fire, I failed. Because my job is, it seems like we're at odds with each other, but my job is to keep them safe, and if they do have to go to a fire, that they all come home safe. But my job is to make sure that we don't have the fires. We are going to have fires. It's a natural occurrence in society. It's a natural occurrence in nature. So how do we mitigate that natural occurrence? How do we keep the losses reduced? So I think that's going to be the challenge, the balance of what can our budget stand, what are our communities willing to accept, and what can we do? Because in my opinion, the bottom line is, what is your community willing to accept? And philosophically, are you willing to accept a reduction in your public safety force? And do you understand the impact that will have on your community?
And having said that, can you outline some of your major administrative and management responsibilities? You've alluded to some of these indirectly, but on a given day to day, what are your primary duties?
Oh, day to day. I always tell people my day to day is to go to a lot of meetings. No, I spend a lot of time connecting with our stakeholders. I call that checking in. I spend time talking to industry, emerging technologies, talking with my counterparts in other state agencies that what they're doing, how that affects what I'm trying to do, so that we can somewhat stay coordinated. And sometimes it's a challenge to stay coordinated within state government, because there's so many people doing so many things. Most of my time is interacting with our stakeholders, whether I'm talking to fire chiefs, finding out what some of their issues are, how can I help them with their issues, how can I be a voice for some of those issues or challenges, or if it's within my own department or within my own group of folks, what are some of their challenges, who are they having problems with. Sometimes you need to bump it up to the next level. Can I help bump it up to the next level? Those type of things. That's mostly what my day involves. Policies, what I'm doing in the office of the State Fire Marshal, how that translates over to the rest of my own department within CAL FIRE. How can I help my fire protection side of the house with some of their tasks? That's typically what I end up doing. A lot of time on the phone.
As you alluded to earlier, you have a teenage daughter.
Yes, I do.
Is she interested in following your mother's footsteps?
No way. She appreciates it. She understands it, and I always love taking her with me when I talk, because it gives her a chance to see what I do day in and day out. but that's her passion doesn't sit in fire. She spent her life, her 18 years, being subjected to her father and I. Because as I said, my ex-husband is a fire protection engineer, and she's had to put up with that for a long time. and her thing lies someplace else, and that's okay. That's okay. She has an appreciation. She knows it's provided her a great life, a great opportunity. She sees the camaraderie. She's been around the fire stations. She understands what gets done, but that's not her love.
You're following the footsteps, though, of another successful woman in the fire safety field. You mentioned Kate Dargan.
Yes.
Though it's changing in your profession. In the past, it's not had a significant number of women in top leadership roles. Mm-hmm. Was Dargan a role model for you, and did you have other female and male role models in your business career?
Kate is a role model. She's an individual that spent 30 years in the fire service, in CAL FIRE, which when she started was CDF, California Department of Forestry. Someone that worked from being a firefighter to being a captain to being a battalion chief, and then holding the position of a 4-star chief within the organization. She's a role model in how she presents herself, the tactics that she's used over the years to promote fire safety, her commitment to fire protection. She talks about, I didn't have to, I didn't live in a fire station. I didn't spend part of my career on shift. I didn't, women in the fire service early on had a tough time. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Just like any fraternity or organization, when it's all dominated by one sex and you introduce the different sex, it can be challenging. And there are some folks that don't want to see change because change is scary. I listen to some of those stories and I think I didn't have to live that. And I thank people like Kate and some of the other females that came before me for blazing that trail, because they basically opened the door for me. They took the heat so that I can do what I do. Have I had my challenges? Sure. But don't we all? I try not to focus on the male or female thing.
Can you discuss your leadership philosophy a little bit?
Oh, my leadership philosophy has evolved over the past couple of years. And I say that because where I came from, I was pretty much a one-person show.
More hands-on.
Yeah, it was more hands-on, and we joke about it at work about being in the weeds. I was very involved in all the little pieces of what was going on within my bureau and that interaction. As you move through your profession, you have the opportunity to work and have other people around you. You have to let go, and you have to trust that the people that are working for you and with you are very capable. And as my division chiefs tell me occasionally, they'll look at me and say, "We got it under control, Chief." Okay, that's the sign of let it go. It's okay. We understand what you're trying to do here. What I find that I want to empower my people to do the best job they can, and provide occasional direction, provide vision. I get to provide the vision, and they get to help us all get there. And they're all different people with different ways of doing things, but that's what's good about it, because I think in the environment that we're working in, since it is so diversified, you have to have diversified look at things. And from a leadership standpoint, I start pointing the direction, and I have faith that my people will get us there, that we will get there together. I've learned to get out of the weeds. I think it's important to get out of the weeds.
Does your perspective as a woman influence your management philosophy and leadership style?
I think so.
What
I
ways?
think I rely more on on interpersonal skills. I rely more on relationships. I mentioned earlier about insight and intuition just doesn't feel right. I think that's a little different than maybe some of the folks that have served before me, which have been men. I mean, I'm the 15th, I think it is, 14th or 15th Fire Marshal. I'm the second woman. Kate was the first, as the 14th, yeah, so I'm the 15th. And with that, women bring a different leadership style. Again, does it mean that they're not as tough? No. I think we look at things a little differently. I am a believer that we're wired differently. And it brings a different perspective on things.
Has there been any pushback? You mentioned like two fire marshals in a row now for the state.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think again, we had such incredible leadership. We've had incredible leadership, and we had incredible leadership with Chief Grijalva, who came in, and when he moved on, and then Kate being the leader she is, and the visionary she is, and I'll tell you a funny Kate story. And then having worked for Kate for 2.5 years and had an opportunity to see that, it's been a pretty smooth transition. I mean, we each bring our own piece to the table, our vision to the table, but it's been a pretty smooth transition, and it's kind of like just carrying it forward. I always tell folks, Chief Grijalva, Ruben did this, and then Kate picked it up and she did this. My job now is to tie it off. We've done so much work, pre-work, at so many things. I look at my job as, let's tie it off and get her done.
You made me follow up the candid question.
Sure.
You're talking about Kate went through the ranks as 4-star, as chief, and battalion commander, etc. One might suppose that there's a little more acceptance of her moving in the fire marshal, saying, well, she's earned her pay and come through the ranks. Did you feel any sense of frustration, maybe, or question on some people's minds that you had not gone through the typical ranks?
That's a good question, and yes. I've got boxes that I check off, you might say. And after I leave this position, if I do not have the opportunity to be reappointed under the next administration, I laugh and tell people I gotta go find a job because I'm a long way from retiring. So one thing about doing this early is you gotta go find a job afterwards. And my hope is to go back into local government, and I want to go back as the fire chief. But there's still this sense, not everywhere, but a lot of places, that to be a good fire chief, you've had to have spent your time basically on the line, and you've had to be one of them. I have an appreciation for that. I understand that. But it took me some time to get over that hump myself in my brain, that no, I understand it, I appreciate it, I've been around it, I've done it on a limited basis, but my job is to make sure that you get what you want. And being a firefighter does not get you what you want. Getting you what you need and what you want is understanding your role and being able to speak to those people that can make sure we get what we need and want. And I think that's what I possess. Is I may not have all the boots on the ground experience, but I've got this diversified environment that I've worked in, and the circles and the associations and the connections to be able to get the boots on the ground with you. Because I have a full respect for that. That's, when you're doing it and you're doing it passionately, there's nothing else like it in the world. And it's been a challenge at times. Folks, well, you weren't a firefighter, so how can you be a fire chief? Well, I wasn't a firefighter in the typical mindset. But I tell folks, no matter what we're doing in the fire service, whether you're a public educator, you're a fire marshal, you're a fire inspector, or you're a firefighter, we're all fighting fire. We're all firefighters. Just do it in a different way.
Tonya, what would you say to a young woman who's interested in a career in fire safety? And what would you say tonight, perhaps, to some of the groups that ask you that?
I've been very fortunate to have met wonderful people that have helped me along the way. But there is, in my mind, I can't think of another profession that I would want to do. I was fortunate to take a hobby. It was my passion, and I turned a passion into a career. And it's a great opportunity if you look at it that way. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are harsh things that get said and done. And yes, there's a glass ceiling. But there's a glass ceiling whether you're at IBM or you're at eBay or you're working for some biotech industry. There's always a glass ceiling somewhere. And if you focus on that, it distracts you from, I think, moving forward. And I try not to focus on that. I focus on moving forward. So I tell, if I was to tell young women today, I found the fire service to be quite rewarding, the way I went into it. Now, I know women that went into it through the operations side of the house, and they still find it very rewarding. It's what you make it.
You said you had a Kate story earlier that relates to that.
Yeah, we were talking. I mentioned earlier about visionaries, and two things. Kate was such a visionary. Kate was so far out there. I mean, Kate was 15 years ahead of all of us. And if you've ever worked for a visionary, they're out there running down the road. They're gone. You can't even see them. And and you're supposed to implement their vision. So soon after I got there, she was late. She got caught on a plane. She had to give a presentation. She called me on the phone. She goes, "Hey, can you give a presentation for me? I got to go do this thing on the wildland urban interface. I'm not going to make it. Can you go do it for me?" And I said, "Sure." She goes, "Well, tell them I'll be there tonight for the reception, but you can give the talk." I said, "Okay, great." I said, "Not a problem." I said, "Okay, where's your PowerPoint?" And she says, "I don't have a PowerPoint." "Okay, where's your notes? I can get it out of your inbox. Is it on your computer?" She goes, "It's all in my head. Tonya, we've been doing this for so long. You can just go and do it. You know exactly what to say. Just go do it." And I thought, oh my gosh, because there's very big shoes to fill there. Well, soon after I started, that's one of the soon after I started stories that kind of put me into the mindset of what I was in for. Soon after I started, 2007, California faced one of the worst firestorms in history. We had over 220 fires burning simultaneously throughout the state, most of them in Southern California. 3 of the largest complex fires that California's ever faced down in the San Diego area. For the most part, we thought the state was burning. Most of the state we thought was burning. It was burning, but when you look at California, it was like little blips on a map. But they were in highly populated areas. Very, very critical situation. And this is October. I started in September. She asked me to go sit with our state operations center, our SOC, which is where the governor goes and the Cal Emergency Management Group is at, and where we run all of our information, our public information, and dissemination out of the Sacramento SOC. She says, "Well, I'm a public information officer, public speaking, TV, all that stuff." And she says, "That's where I want you to go. You can go help with the information. You can keep our locals informed. You can talk for folks." And I said, "Great, I'll go to Sacramento." So I spent like 3 days in Sacramento doing that. And I'm driving into Sacramento one morning, and she calls me on the phone. She goes, "Hey, I need you to do something for me." "Sure, what do you got?" She says, "I need you to go to Southern California. I need you to leave now." It's 8:30 in the morning. I'm still trying to get to traffic, and I said, "Okay." She goes, "I've got some folks coming in from Colorado. I'm going to do some advanced imagery for us, some advanced technology. You know the folks coming in from Colorado. You've worked with them. You've worked around them. I need you to be the liaison for this special group that I'm putting together, intelligent group I'm putting together, and I need you to work with the following folks, which were folks that I hadn't met yet. And I was going to the Southern Region office to do this. And she said, so I need you to be on the plane. I need you to be able to meet them today by 2 o'clock. And I don't know where it came from, but I said, because I was all set to go to the SOC. And I said, do I have to? Caught myself. And she didn't say a word. She just left me think it through. And she says to me, you know this better than anybody. Because she knew, it wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was that I was stepping outside my box. She says, you know this stuff better than anybody else I can send there. And you know these people. She goes, I'd like to have you go. Which meant I had transitioned. And I said, yes, boss, I'll have Sherry set up my plane tickets. I'm on my way back. I'll make sure I get everything done. I should be there by 2 o'clock. She goes, thanks, Tonya. I'll talk to you later on. Okay, no problem. Click. And it was, at that point, I had made my transition. I was no longer a local fire marshal. I had other responsibilities, bigger responsibilities. Went to Southern California, had a great time. Worked for the individual, my contact down there happens to be now the director of CAL FIRE. So we had a very good out-of-the-block relationship, you might say. We got along well, we interacted well, and now he's my boss.
Well, assuming that you say would have a more extended career as fire marshal, California.
Gosh, I hope so.
What are your goals and visions for the future of fire safety in California?
Well, my vision I'll start with the vision of the Office of the State Fire Marshal. As it is a part of CAL FIRE, is to work to integrate the Office of the State Fire Marshal more into CAL FIRE as a whole. The Office of the State Fire Marshal has been under CAL FIRE now for about 15 years. And just like any marriage, there's been challenging times. And I think we've made it through those challenging times, and we're at the point where now's a good time to finish what I'll call an integration. The State Fire Marshal's Office has wonderful skill sets and wonderful people that they can bring into the other side of our family. And that's part of my, I'll call that, as long as I'm with the State Fire Marshal, whether it be a year, 2 years, 3 years, that's the internal aspects. My other vision, and where my passion lies for the California Fire Service as well as fire service as a whole, is an understanding and an integration of everything that we do in the fire service for our community, whether it be operations, prevention, or training. That I call it the new fire triangle, and that we feed off of each other for this fire. And that operations needs prevention, prevention feeds into operations, training takes from both aspects, and that we need to continue to work together. Operations needs to understand the prevention aspects, because what operations needs to do their job safely, prevention knows about. We are the ones that are in the planning phases. We're the ones that are in the development phases and the code phases. Training, when new technologies arise that come out of buildings, fire prevention knows about it, they feed it to training. Training needs to provide that to the operations folks, so that these three pieces make sure that the operations folks can do their job as safe as possible. It is an inherently dangerous job. People will get hurt, and unfortunately, sometimes people don't come home. But it's my job to make sure that those are few and far between. And so my vision for the fire service as a whole is to tightly integrate those three pieces so that we're working in concert.
Tonya, you're obviously passionate about fire safety profession. Where does that passion come from? We talk about your youth a little bit, and maybe your parents and background, but you know, to the extent to what motivates you to seek and accept these continuing greater challenges?
I believe in the core value of the fire service. I believe in public servants. I believe the fire service serves the public, and we have a responsibility to do everything we can to serve our public. Whether you're a career or a volunteer, you're there to serve your public. And I think that's where my passion comes from. We're all entitled to safety, and the fire service is part of that safety piece. And it's hard to say where that passion comes from. But I think bottom line is I believe in the fire service. I believe in what it stands for. You know, it's morphed and changed over the years, but I still believe in its core value system.
Looking back in your career, and hopefully it's not over, but to this point, you know what I'm saying? How do you hope people remember Tonya Hoover? I mean, what do you hope they'll say about you?
Oh my goodness. I hope they see a commitment to the cause. I hope they perceive, or they think I was a good listener, and that I wanted to move things forward, that I believed in what I was preaching. So many things. You know, it's so hard. I think, what do you want people to say about you when you die? I like shoes. I don't know. You know? I mean, I hope that they know and they think that I did the best I could.
Tonya, what have we left out? What have we not covered? Is there anything you'd like to share with us that we haven't talked about?
Well, we pretty much talked about my life in a very short time period. I can't think of anything other than I can't stress enough that I've had wonderful opportunities, and I've done none of this by myself. From the people that I've met growing up, to the folks that I've met and carried relationships through, from here at Oklahoma State to my family, to the help I had with my ex-husband's family and him, to my daughter. I haven't done none of this by myself. So it's been a great opportunity. And thank you so much.
Appreciate you taking the time to visit.
Thank you.